Hello everybody and welcome back to Lost Planeswalker. You're here with me, Jesse, the Lost Planeswalker, and today we have a very cool co-commander from the Eldrazi Incursion deck, Azlask, the Swelling Scourge. I did the video about the face commander and it was very popular, and I thought this would be a very fun way to look at another strategy this deck presents but doesn't really build around. So let's look at Azlask right here and see how he works. Azlask, the Swelling Scourge, 3 generic legendary creature Eldrazi. When Azlask, the Swelling Scourge, or another colorless creature you control dies, you get an experience counter. So very cool, we get experience counters just from our colorless creatures or our own creature dying. Seems pretty neat. Then for Wooburg, creatures you control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of experience counters you have. And then Scions and Spawns you control gain Indestructible and Annihilator 1 until end of turn. This is a very, very fun deck where we're focusing around specifically Scion and Spawn tokens, and that's the way I built out this deck. I did some deep research, and I really made this a Spawn-only deck. We did find some Scion cards that were really powerful, so I kept those in, but I thought it'd be much more fun to build it around that versus just big Eldrazi like you normally do. Now, before we get into the cards, there are 6 cards, notably, that I want to include, and I think it's just these 6, but it's more experience counters. Experience counters don't stack separately based on different cards, they are all stacked on one. So because this is a 5-color commander that cares about experience counters, you might want to play these other experience cards, which honestly aren't that bad, especially if you're building a Scion and Spawn deck. So we have Yuzuri, Claw of Progress, Kilmani, Disciple of Ironis, Kelson, the Plague, Maren of Clan Neltoth, Minarath, Merciless Soul, and Athari, Sun's Glory. Very interestingly, you know, this is kind of a cool way. You can play these as secondary options. Yuzuri here is pretty great because he cares about creatures of power 2 or less entering the battlefield, so you can get a ton off of those spawn tokens. Kalmini, if that's how you say it, you know, you have some bigger spells. I mainly kept to some smaller spells, but there certainly are a good number of spells above 5 mana, so a very cool way to get experience counters there. Kelson, it's on the fence, you know, that you could find some situations where that's going to be powerful. Maren, of course, Maren is probably one of the best. Obviously, if you were playing an Azlask deck, I would just put Maren in anyways. Min there gives Ward, which is actually pretty neat, and can buff up all of your creatures, making them even stronger. And then Orthari, Sun's Glory, kind of just does his own thing, getting those counters. So a very cool way you could build this deck by including the 6 cards. Now, I didn't. I just wanted to bring these up before we dive into it. So let's see how this deck is going to be divided up. First off, we're going to talk about all those cards that create those spawns and Scion tokens. Next, we're going to look at ways you can buff or use those tokens to your advantage. And then lastly, you have some good support cards, some really cool, you know, things that you can take advantage of playing all 5 colors in this deck. So let's start out by looking at all these different ways we can create those Scion and Spawn tokens. Now, first off, I want to talk about making tokens every turn, because I think that's going to be one of the most powerful ways to amass a giant board of them. So we have Awakening Zone, From Beyond, and Spawn Bed Protector. Awakening Zone is 2 and a green enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn. It has sack it to add a colorless mana. Similarly, From Beyond, 3 and a green enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield, sack it, get a colorless mana. Then, for 1 and a green, sack From Beyond, search your library for an Eldrazi card. You may reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. A very good way to take advantage. If you already have enough tokens on the board, get something better. And then Spawn Bed Protector, 7 generic creature Eldrazi. At the beginning of your end step, return up to 1 target Eldrazi creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Create 2 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature tokens with sack it to add a colorless mana. What I like about the Protector is if you're going to get a threat and it keeps getting removed, you get to get it back every turn, and they have to remove that and the threat in order to deal with the problem entirely. So a very cool way, and you actually make 2 every turn if you can do that, so pretty good. Next, let's talk about making mass amounts of spawn tokens. Yes, these are going to give us a couple every turn, but there's some ways we can make even more. So we have Chittering Dispatcher, Kozilek's Command, and Spawn Sire of Ulamog. Chittering Dispatcher, 2 and a green creature Eldrazi drone with Devoid and Myriad, meaning when you attack with this, you make a copy for each opponent other than the one this is attacking, and when it leaves the battlefield, create a 0/1 colorless spawn creature token. So if those other 2 die in any way, hey, you get those spawn tokens, so you're getting at least 3 spawn tokens, if not more. Very cool card. Then we have Kozilek's Command, X, colorless mana, Kindred, instant Eldrazi, choose 2, target player creates X 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens, target player scries X and draws a card, exile target creature with mana value X or less, or exile up to X target cards from a graveyard. Actually, a very versatile card. I wish it wasn't colorless mana, but I understand, they're wanting to restrict it to purely colorless decks, or decks that, can generate a ton of colorless mana. But creating basically as many as you can of this spawn is really neat. And Spawn, Sire of Ulamog, 10 generic creature Eldrazi with Annihilator 1. 4, put 2 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens onto the battlefield. They have sack it to gain a colorless mana. Then for 20 mana, cast any number of Eldrazi cards you own from outside the game without paying their mana cost. Now, this isn't going to work here, obviously. Commander doesn't have a sideboard of anything, so you can't just grab anything out unless you're doing some homebrew rules about it. But if you have a haste effect on the board, by paying 2 additional mana, you can basically make an infinite number of spawn. There are some ways, like in Ashnod's Altar, you'll get enough colorless mana to just do this over and over and over again. So a very cool way to kind of go infinite, get enough experience counters where you can kind of just win the game by making them X big. They don't have trample, but we have some ways to give them that. So there are a lot more ways to make a ton of Spawns and Scion tokens, but let's run through those cards real quick. With Brooding Birthing, Emrakul's Hatcher, Emrakul's Messenger, Glaring Flesh Raker, Glimpse the Impossible, Idol of the False Gods, Kozilek's Predator, Kozilek's Unsealing, Path of Annihilation, Pawn of Ulamog, Progenitor's Drone, Rampacious One, Skittering Percuser, Spawn Gang Commander, Unfathomable Truths, and Withering Chrysalis. Now, very quickly, before we move into those great support cards that are going to give us a ton of value off of making and having all of those tokens, I just want to say, if you please consider subscribing to my channel, sharing this video, it would just mean the world to me. I'm very close to hitting 3,000 subscribers, and if I could get there by the end of July, I would be so incredibly happy. So thank you, and let's see those token buffs and other interaction pieces. So first off, like I mentioned, we're going to look at ways to buff up those tokens or colorless things in general. So we have Brood Warden, Eldrazi Monument, and Forsaken Monument. So Brood Warden here, 3 green creature Eldrazi Drone. Eldrazi spawn creatures you control get +2/+1. This was one of the cards that I found that kind of pushed me towards the spawn route. I didn't see any cards that kind of revolved around making Scions better. Although Scion tokens already have a power, and spawns don't. That really doesn't matter in this commander deck per se, because our commander buffs up everything. But I just thought this was a cool inclusion that I didn't see in any deck lists. Next, we have Eldrazi Monument, 5 generic artifact creatures you control get +1/+1 and have flying and indestructible, so already incredibly powerful. Then at the beginning of your upkeep, sack a creature. If you can't, sack Eldrazi Monument. We're going to be making way too many spawn tokens. We're definitely going to have something to sack every turn, and when we do, it's just going to power up our commander. And then Forsaken Monument, 5 generic legendary artifact colorless creatures you control get +2/+2. That seems awesome. Whenever you tap a permanent for colorless, you add an additional colorless, which notably is very powerful of our Scions whenever we sack them. It just says whenever you tap a permanent, they are permanents, and we are tapping them, so we are going to get that mana. And whenever you cast a colorless spell, you may gain 2 life. We are playing a 5-color deck, but there are certainly a lot of colorless spells, including all of the Eldrazi that count themselves as devoid also in this deck. So we have a lot of options there. So next, we're going to look at some Eldrazi interactions. Some of these Eldrazi cards that really care about these spawn tokens are going to help us make more of them or do something cool with them. We have Echoes of Eternity, Hand of Emrakul, and Ugalalek Fused Atrocity. Echoes of Eternity, 3 colorless, Kindred Enchantment Eldrazi. If a triggered ability of a colorless spell you control or another colorless permanent you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. And whenever you cast a colorless spell, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. I don't know what to say. This is an awesome Eldrazi card. One of the coolest things about this deck is everything is so cheap, and we're generating mana with those spawn that we're going to be able to really take advantage of this. Where a normal Eldrazi deck is going to be good, but normally you cast 1 or 2 things. If we get this going, we can cast, 4 or 5 things a turn. Hand of Emrakul is 9 generic creature Eldrazi. You may sack 4 Eldrazi spawn rather than pay this mana cost. It's got an Annihilator 1, and it's a 7/7. That seems pretty great to me. Sack 4, get 4 experience counters. This gets put on the battlefield. Yeah, I don't see any downside to playing this card other than it's 9 generic, which, you know, we're going to be able to generate a lot of mana with this deck. And then Ulalek, Fused Atrocity, hybrid colorless white, colorless blue, colorless black, colorless red, and colorless green. Legendary creature Eldrazi with Devoid. Whenever you cast an Eldrazi spell, you may pay 2 generic. If you do copy that spell you control, you may copy all other activated or triggered abilities you control. You may choose new targets for the copies. So basically another version of Echoes of Eternity. This is the main commander of this deck, and I think it's very powerful, obviously. Still very cheap right now, but like I said, we're going to be casting multiple things per turn, and we're going to have lots of mana from those spawns and scions to pay this cost. So I think this is very good. So lastly, we have additional ways to turn spawns into value that maybe these other cards haven't done already. So we have Angelic Aberration, Cryptolith Rite, and Kindred Discovery. Angelic Aberration is 5 and a white creature, Eldrazi Angel with Devoid, Flying, and Vigilance. When Angelic Aberration enters the battlefield, sack any number of creatures, each with base power or toughness 1 or less. Create that many 4/4 colorless Eldrazi Angel creature tokens with Flying and Vigilance. So it just says, hey, replace your entire board with a bunch of angels. They got Flying, they got Vigilance. This is awesome. You know, this is gonna be a win con in this deck. Now, I don't think they have haste necessarily, so if you're gonna play this route, maybe you add some other cards that add haste into this deck, but very, very cool angel. Cryptolith Rite, 1 green enchantment. Creatures you control have tapped. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Pretty staple card. It's actually going up in price here, I see. You know, above $10, and yeah, 2 mana for all of your scions now instead of tapping just to add a mana of 1 color. Seems really good. And then Kindred Discovery, 3 blue enchantment. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield or attacks, draw a card. We're going to be doing that both when they ETB and when we use them with our commander in order to attack. Annihilator, drawing cards, indestructible, +X is a big threat. So now let's look at the rest of those colorless and token support cards here with Adrix and Nev Twincaster, Distant Melody, Eldrazi Displacer, Impact Tremors, Maskwood Nexus, Mirror Entity, Second Harvest, Vanquisher's Banner, and War Leader's Call. So lastly here, as always, we have the good stuff, and I just want to show off a couple of new cards. A lot of the other good stuff is cards we already know about, but we have Eldritch Immunity, It That Heralds the End, and Selective Obliteration. Eldritch Immunity is a colorless Kindred instant Eldrazi that says target creature control gains protection from each color until end of turn, or overload it for only 4 and a colorless, meaning that if you do have enough mana to pay Wooburg, then activate this as well. All of your Eldrazi Spawn and Scions that you added +X, Annihilator, and Indestructible now become unblockable. So that seems pretty powerful. In addition, you can just use this as a protection spell to protect everything from a board wipe or who knows what. As long as it's dealing damage, it's not going to affect our things. Next is It That Heralds the End, 1 and a colorless creature, Eldrazi Drone. Colorless spells you cast with mana value 7 or greater, cost 1 less to cast, and other colorless creatures you control get +1/+1. This one falls more into that buffing up category, and there really aren't that many 7 or above drops in this deck. I think in total there are 5, so not a huge value on that end, but just buffing up our tokens, and it's new, so I thought I'd show it off. And then Selective Obliteration, again, another new commander card. 3 colorless sorcery. Each player chooses a color, then exile each permanent unless it's colorless, or it's only the color its controller chooses. So basically, you got to pick 1 color, and all of the permanents that are just that color get saved, and all the rest of them get destroyed. Very powerful way to just wipe the board there. And I think this card is going to be a big threat as well. But let's look at some of the other good stuff here with Abstruse Apparition, All Is Dust, Arcane Signet, Assassin's Trophy, Blasphemous Act, Chromatic Lantern, Commander Sphere, Conduit of Ruin, Cultivate, Farseek, Garruk's Uprising, Herald of Kozilek, Kodama's Reach, Mystic Forge, Null Elemental Blast, Path to Exile, Skull Clamp, Soul Ring, Titan's Presence, and Urza's Incubator. And one last note I want to say before you guys leave the video here, if you want to check out the deck list, I included all of the very expensive additional cards, whether they were lands, token doublers, you know, anything that I just was over like $20 really. Maybe a lot of these $35, $40, like Ancient Tomb, Anointed Procession, Mondrak, you know, all of these cards that are very expensive that I think would be very, very good additions to this deck. But if you just want to build this at a decent price, which right now the deck is like $500, which isn't that decent, but removing a couple cards can really get it down and get it to a price range which would be easy to build or even upgrade. So with that, I would just like to say thank you so much for watching. This was a super fun video to do, and I hope you think so as well. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought about the cards I decided to add, or did you think that there were some other cards I should have added or cut from this deck? I would love to hear about it. In addition, if you would please leave a like, share this video with a friend, and subscribe, that would mean the world to me. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Now today's Scryfall card of the day is an Unfinity card with Monitor. 9 fires, a Hull Breach, and a Quinoflovian Mega Nimbler escaped from the petting zoo. Things were suspiciously quiet. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.